As Job Snijders also mentioned this morning, there are, and sorry, I forgot his name, but the guy from Curator who Labs who presented the first presentation also mentioned this. There are also efforts at looking at that. So what is this all about? Well, essentially this question. Is a BGP route authorized by the legitimate holder of the IP space? And the answer can either be yes or no, or, well, they didn't say. So if you look at the topology and your AS 65004 here, and you get various things, it's your mission to make a decision, then, well, what might happen is that you see the same prefix from different locations, and that might actually be perfectly normal because that's used in any cast as a feature. You might see a more specific announcement from somewhere that's also normal, and normally you would prefer that. So you would pick either of the /20s here on the left and that 24 and pass it on. So the problem is of course, misoriginations. So what if people are announcing addresses that they shouldn't, either because of they're malicious or because they just mistyped something? Then if in the presence of a ROA you can actually make a decision, an informed decision about what you would expect. So in this case only the announcement from 65001 would be selected. Now if people are really malicious, then path spoofing is something that could be done. You could pretend that AS 65001 is in front of you, and in this case the ROA actually permits a announcement up to a /24, so it would look all valid. Now that's where origin and path validation kind of it's important to look at both aspects. So ROAs today already give protection against a lot of issues, especially misconfigurations that are where people have no intention of doing path spoofing. But there are also good efforts in practical path validation, and these drafts are currently this adoption call is actually happening at the moment at the ITF in the CyberOps working group. But essentially what they try to do is lock down things in a way where as an AS holder you can say, these are the ASs you might expect after me. And if you don't say anything, then anything goes. But if you do specify what's expected after you, then that's information that people can use. All right, so almost enough of that. One more thing I really want to say here is, if you publish ROAS, go all in. So make sure that when you do it properly. Because if you don't, and people start validating, then your routes might be dropped. So it's better to do nothing than do it badly. For a long time, people got away with misconfigurations because very few parties were actively dropping, but nowadays that's changing. So as is also illustrated by this tweet, this is not to lash out at Orange. This could happen to other organizations as well. The point is, you really need to make it part of what you do. So, okay, I was going to talk about infrastructure, so let's move on. There are separate components, separate actors that you need to keep in mind in this whole ecosystem. So there's the certificate authority. That's the bit that does all the heavy lifting crypto work, as in signing things. So that's where you have your private key, where you can have certificates and where you can make ROAs. Those files are essentially published at a publication server who makes them available to the world. That is then accessed by a relying party software. There's 5 or 6 flavors at the moment, which validates, and then that gets communicated to your router, either through, well, I'll get to that actually. The RPKI RTR protocol is something you might have heard about. So this is a protocol where the router can talk to a validator and get things. Other people might use other ways like doing CSV exports and having other ways to instrument their router. I'll get back to this a bit later as well, but the publication server, so it's using rsync at the moment, but there are efforts to change that to a HTTPS-based protocol. So the certificate authority structure, well, it's basically an RPKI tree or a PKI tree for resources with 5 trust anchors at the moment. Where in the APNIC region, of course, you also have national internet registries in some cases. So you could be either a direct member on the APNIC or under an NAR. And as a member, you can, well, publish your ROAS. Now, hosted versus delegated. So the RARs and some of the NARs provide hosted services. LARs, I think that might be a RIPE region-specific term. It's local internet registry, which is essentially RIPE members, if you will. I guess they do not offer this as a service because they would have to run delegated, actually. But the bottom line is, yes, there is hosted services being provided. And that means that all the certificates, keys, and signed products are in that service, in that infrastructure, and you don't need to run your own infrastructure for this. You can run your own certificate authority and do all the work yourself. And I believe that LACNIC is actually working on implementing this, but in all the other cases, this is a function that is possible. So hosted RPKI is pretty much what I just said. Typically, you would use some kind of web portal and a login that you have there to access an interface where you can say, okay, I'd like these ROAS to be created. And they're all a bit different, but at least some of them provide guidance to help users create the right ROAS. I have a screenshot here from the RIPE NCC LAR portal because we're a member there. So it was easy for me to get, but the APNIC service is similar. In some way, maybe even better because I think it allows you to do both ROAS and root objects in one go. So, but the point here is, yes, you can review your announcements and you can say this is valid, supposed to be valid, this is actually not supposed to be valid. And here you can also opt into alerting. So you get an email if something is wrong. I'm not 100% sure that that's also available in APNIC, but somebody can correct me on that. Yeah? Okay, well. So, delegated. Well, you can, of course. You can run the software. You become a child CA, as it's called, under the, well, essentially already a child CA, even if you use the hosted system, but you run your own then. Generate your own key pairs, certificates to be signed, and publish everything. And actually, in this case, you can also delegate down further, which might not be available to you if you use a hosted service. For relying parties, it shouldn't matter because all these certificates have pointers as to where you can find the products, and you know that's all just followed. So, which one is right for you? Well, it really depends. In most cases, I guess hosted is fine because there's no cost really of running your own hardware, hardware security modules, etc. Well, maybe you do worry about uptime, but you don't have to actually do it. It's somebody else's problem. So it's easy to get started, and it's also easy to gain operational experience. So why would you consider doing your own? Well, there may be better integration with your own systems. I'm not sure if all of the solutions out there provide APIs, for example. There may be a better control of which users in your organizations get to make changes, because with member portals there tend to be a number of people, and maybe those are not the people who are doing the actual routing. The option to delegate to your own customers may be important to you, or it may not be. I mean, if you are a big organization with customers or let's say branches in other places, then that may be useful. You become somewhat operationally independent from the parent RAR. Of course, the parent certificate has to be there and valid, but the certificate that they sign to you. But for example, if there's an issue with logging into a portal, then that wouldn't affect you. Also, and this is really for the really big ones out there, if you have to interface with multiple parents, you have resources from different regions, then this can become a bit cumbersome. Then you have to do it all in different ways all over the place. And finally, yes, you are in possession of your own key this way. So, okay, so if you think this sounds like a good idea, then how do you actually do it? So what kind of setup do you need? Well, the choices are somewhat limited still. There's RPK ID by Dragon Research Labs, which is also used by NARs in this region. And you can install that and work with that. And of course, well, we're as an LNAT Labs, we're working on one, but it's kind of hard to install because it's not finished. So it should come late this year, though. And please do talk to us if you have any questions about this. But more generally speaking, so what are the concerns? For example, do you need really military-grade hardware for this? Well, probably not. It's not that intensive. Whether you want to use a hardware security module is really up to you. Like in the software we're building, it won't be in the initial release, but we are definitely thinking of building that in later. On the other hand, you can always roll your keys as well. So it's up to you really. A publication server, yeah, if you run your own publication server, that has some consequences because that's really internet facing, anybody can access it. So there are some challenges there for your operations possibly. However, there may also be a hybrid option that's available to you. And that means just basically use somebody else's computer for this. And well, in a whole way, I can maybe elaborate a bit more about what the value of dollar cloud is here. But we did have some informal talks with people, and somebody at least indicated like, okay, we might be interested in providing that as a service to community. So if you went for this option, that meant, I think that's on this slide, no? Well, basically that means, no, never mind. Pretty sure that comes later. One more word about the publication server infrastructure first. So it relies on rsync, which has its issues. You could make it scale, but at cost. There's a new protocol based on HTTPS, and it's specifically designed to work with CDNs. Because if you think about it, the state of a repository and any change in the repository is essentially a thing that doesn't change. Its snapshots are static, changes are static. So it's really something that you could CDN. And then, yes, the note, that's where I wanted to go. The note here at the bottom is, if your publication server is available, then UCA does not need to be available all the time necessarily. Of course, you want to have it, access it whenever you make changes, but you don't have to have it running all the time for people to see what your statements are. And then what if it does break? Because any system that can break will break, I suppose. So with DNSSEC, and this is not to lash out at them, but yeah, if things break there, that can really lead to your zone being unavailable. With RPKI, well, it depends a bit on the failure mode, but generally speaking, things should go to the not found state, let's say, if your certificate expires, etc. The one thing to really watch out for is, well, I'm making changes in my routing announcements, and I cannot currently change my ROAS. Then you might have a bigger issue. But other than that, for the most part, it's not that bad, let's say. So to basically summarize, should you run your own? Well, it depends really. is it more secure? I didn't really talk about this earlier, but I guess the answer is either a no or a questionable yes. So in terms of your certificate being revoked, there's no change here. I mean, you get a certificate from your parent, whether you use hosted or delegated. The parent says which resources you have, and they can always change that. But what you may get from this is slightly better control about who gets to use your system. Is it more convenient? Well, it depends. I mean, there's definitely a cost to running your own. So there is a pain in that. But does that outweigh the other things, like accessing some web interface in the middle of the night, but also how many prefixes do you actually have to manage, and are they stable, or do they change often? Do you manage things for customers that using a hosted system you would have to either exclude all of that space from doing ROAS, or you would have to manage the ROAS for them? And do you have to interface with multiple upstreams? So those are all questions that influence whether it's actually a good idea to go down this road or not. So yeah, it's up to you, I guess. I can't tell you what your choice is, but I think that's the spectrum. Further reading. So before I close off, I wanted to highlight one more thing. We are working on an RPKI documentation project at this URL. And we already received quite some feedback from the community, so that's very good. We really want to make something where we can make a comprehensive overview of this is how all of this stuff works. It also includes the documentation for the tools that we are building, but we're quite happy to include other documentation for other tools as well, or references to where it may be found. And the framework that we use for this also allows for internationalization, so if people want to contribute other language content, then we'd be very happy to work with you as well. So this is open source, and I think on that page there's a link to where it lives on GitHub and all that. So I urge you, have a look. With that, my last slide with a cool rocket. This is where you can reach us. And I actually have a total of 5 stickers with that rocket on it. So if you have a question or a comment, you might get a sticker.
Thank you. Questions? Sorry.
Yeah.
I came up thinking I would use the mic.
Taiji from Japan. Short comment. Thank you for presenting about the new CS software, because we have not so many CS software for RPKI. So I'd like to introduce to the Japanese community about the CS software. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, I would love to follow up on that. Yeah, we also feel that it's really important that there is genetic diversity in the options to run your own software. What I didn't mention earlier, of course, the RERs also have systems, but they tend to be very tightly coupled to how their member database, et cetera, works. So those are not open source solutions that are usable. So we think it's really important that there are more options.
Martin Levy from Cloudflare. Thank you, and I've already said this to you guys, but thank you for doing this work. It's an important step. But there's a data point that we should be aware of. If you actually look at the number of delegated CAs today, there are in fact only the 3 in the AP-NIC region, of which Japan is one of the 3. They're the country delegations, China, Taiwan, and Japan. And in other regions, the only one that's actually active at the moment is RGNet, which is Randy Bush. Mm-hmm. So we desperately need to know the operational side of this. So having software, having diversity of software, these are very good points. But this is maybe more a statement out to the community, and then a question out to you is, who will take this software and be the first generic guinea pig for this?
Right.
And then will you come back with an operational talk to talk about the experiences? Running a CA in a delegated mode is not the easiest thing to do. However, as very few people have done it, we don't have enough operational experience. And you've written this, so now this is your second job to go talk about how it's used.
Yes, absolutely. So a few things there. First of all, so the funding for this work is actually coming from various places. Nick.br was the first to sponsor us because they are looking to deploy RPKI in Brazil, and essentially they asked us to build the software for them. So they will be the first actual users. As part of that, they also said, please make it such that people can also use it in a delegated mode, which is something we wanted to do anyway, but they're aligned with that. But I guess in terms of first practical experience, it will be with them. And of course, we also want to run it for ourselves, but you know, we are a very small network. We have 2 prefixes, they don't change, so we're not really representative of bigger players out there. What we do, well, the proof is in the pudding, obviously. So, yeah, let's build it. And but we definitely aim to make things easy to configure, and we want to make documentation an integral part of what we do. We want to make internationalization a part of the web interface that we have with it. And, you know, very happy to take feedback from people. Also very happy to understand what people see as operational needs and risks, because we have ideas, but it's really good to know if that really resonates with what your daily operations are.
Hi, team. Dima from ZDS. I think the idea to do a delegated RPK is quite meaningful because RPK is designed as a distributed data space. So we don't want all the RPK data maintained in 5IR base. So I think this is making sense. And I also think to use delegated RPK service model is not a dangerous thing. Because just think about the DS world. Since the ICANN launched the new top-level domain program, many registry could choose a third-party backend service to provide this. So, for example, my company ZDS is now the registry backend service for many top-level domains. So I think maybe in the coming future, it could be a new service model that an entity could provide RPKC and repository. In short, a backend for the RPK provisioning side to do such thing. Yeah. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question. If you delegate the authority downstream, so from AppNIC down to somebody else, what's to protect you or to protect the rest of us if someone was to put a historical attribute, say a IP allocation that was 16 years or more old, that's not in AppNIC's history, but it's in the Whois database, and what's to say that they are actually the real owners? What's the protection mechanisms that you're thinking about from that aspect in terms of being a delegated downstream?
So, as a PNIC member, you only get resources on your certificate that a PNIC thinks you are the actual holder for. So it's up to them to verify that. And you can only delegate further down what is on your certificate. So I'm not sure that I get your question entirely
So that's
correctly.
what I'm just clarifying, is that they will stop it at their level before it propagates further because
Yes.
it's not listed against your maintainer object.
Yes.
Okay,
Well,
that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that was clear because it's historical attributes are out there. It's just a case of who actually can say ultimately they are that person or that entity. And that's why I just wanted to clarify if the upstreams will actually filter out based on what they're receiving.
Yes, they will, exactly. You only get that set of resources on your certificate that they believe you have. And for the historical attributes, I don't know how it's handled exactly in the APNIC region, but I know that in the RIPE region, like RIPE and CC, there's an option to bring those resources into the registry, but then you go through verification processes, etc. So I would imagine it's similar here.
Thank you.
Taiji, I think almost the answered by Tim. About in EPNIC, they have different management handle from the normal shared pool for the historical addresses, so they can handle correctly the resources to NIRs.
All right. Next up, we have Barry from INEX talking about integrating RPKI into route servers using IXP Manager. Barry, that was quite a long walk.
Went the long way around.
All you.
Thanks, Tashi. As Tashi said, my name is Barry O'Donovan. I'm here from INEX today to talk about IXP root servers with RPKI and how we've integrated that into IXP Manager. Let me start this presentation by flipping to the back page and telling you how it ends, which is this tweet by Eileen, who, among many other things, looks after INEX's Twitter account, where we announced on Valentine's Day that we had finished the integration of RPKI across all of our root servers at INEX. So this presentation is going to be about the process that brought us there and any issues, which weren't very many to be honest, that we experienced along the way. This is my first time in Apricot. So let me just tell you a quick thing about IXP Manager for those of you that might not be aware of it. IXP Manager is an INEX project. We started it about 12 years ago, and it grew out of provisioning root servers. In the 12 years of running root servers at INEX, we have never manually provisioned them. So no one has ever logged into a root server at INEX to create, edit, or delete a session. They've always been automated. They've always been secure. So IXP Manager does a lot more things now. It's a full administrative portal. It's got a customer portal. It does all the graphing. It does automation for switch configs. But it's one of the things it does best is what it did originally, which is root server provisioning. IXP Manager is open source software. There's a link there to the website. And it's in use at about 70 IXs worldwide that we're aware of. You can see that we're heavily clustered around Europe. Some good users in in Africa and North America. In the APNIC region, we only have about half a dozen that I'm aware of. So if anyone's out there that is using it, please let me know. If you go to ixpmanager.org, you'll find a map and you'll find out how to tell us that you are using it. If you weren't aware of it before, hopefully this might get you to have a look at it and maybe consider using it in your IX. So Tim and others before him have done a great job of talking about RPKI and reintroducing it. I'm not going to go through that. I'm just going to tell you how RPKI fits into the root server side of things for us. So traditionally for root server filtering, we've used IRDBs, Internet Routing Registries. And when a member joins INEX, we ask that we have their AS number, or they give us an AS set if they're bigger and they're carrying routes for other networks. We take those AS numbers, we look up Internet Routing Registries, the appropriate ones for each member, and we end up with a list of prefixes, and we filter against those. As most of you are aware, there's a lot of Internet Routing Registries. Some of them have different levels of quality. There's a lot of duplication, there's a lot of stale records. And there's no way to be absolutely sure of the data. And that is what RPKI is trying to solve. So a ROA, a root origin authorization, is a cryptographically secure version of those root objects. And it adds in one extra piece of information, which is the maximum prefix length. So heretofore, at exchanges and root server filtering, when you have your prefix lists from Internet Routing Registries, you had an option of doing two types of filtering. At INEX, we always did strict filtering. And what that meant was if you were advertising if you had registered a /16 root object, but you're advertising 2/17s, for example, we would have filtered those out. Other IXs choose to do loose filtering, which might allow you to do /16 up to a /24. IXP Manager supports both options. So the second element of using RPKI at root servers is the mechanism that we have used to generate the filter lists by taking those AS numbers, doing the lookup against internet routing registries, bringing all that into a database in IXP Manager, and then using that when we're generating the root server configuration. With RPKI, it's a little bit easier because there's an RPKI to router protocol. So we set up a local cache or a validator, 2 of them in fact on our network, and these talk to the routers directly and give the routers a ROA table, so a table of all the ROAs that have been cryptographically verified by the local caches. So in terms of IXP Manager, the way we tend to develop this is we mostly do the development in public. Sometimes we'll take it into a private repo, as we've done for this, and usually when we take it into a private repo, it's because there's big changes that require proper documentation and release notes. So right now all the RPKI stuff is in a private repo. It's live at INEX. It's currently going through the documentation process, and we're going to release it during the month of March. So we do it for ourselves at INEX, and then we release it. So those 70 IXs that are using IXP Manager will all benefit from that, and anyone else that wants to start using it. When we started this process of RPKI, we took an overall look at how IXP Manager generates root server configuration. So RPKI was just one element we looked at. We also took the opportunity to go from Bird 1.6 to Bird version 2. We did a complete rewrite of the filtering workflow. We made extensive use of large communities. I'll talk about why we did that in a minute. We also upgraded what's called Birdseye. Birdseye is a INEX project that started at a Write Hackathon about 2 years ago. It's essentially a PHP microservice that allows us to query bird daemons on different servers so that we can populate looking glasses. And as part of that, we overhauled IXP Manager's built-in looking glass that talks to these Birdseye services. So in terms of Bird 1 versus Bird 2, the main difference and the main reason we chose it is because it supports the RPKI to router protocol. Bird 1.6 does support RPKI, but you had to manually get the ROAs into Bird in the configuration file. So Bird 2 has the RPKI to router protocol, which makes it much easier. Another thing that changed in Bird 2 is in Bird 1 they had separate code bases and daemons for IPv4 and IPv6. In Bird 2 they've collapsed that into a single daemon, which meant that there's small tweaks and changes to the configuration files. We had a chat with Andre, who's one of who runs the Bird development team, and following his advice, we've kept separate daemons for v4 and v6 in IXP Manager's configuration. So, and that suited us as well because that works with the overall workflow that we had been working with for the last 5 or 6 years with IXP Manager. This is one quick example of how that configuration has changed. The main element, because it's become a multi-protocol daemon, is that configuration elements that apply to a particular protocol, such as import and export filters and routing tables, now end up in a particular protocol stanza. So you can just see it's bracketed by an IPv4 in this example here. So to be perfectly honest, the overall change from Bird 1 to Bird 2 was actually relatively easy. It only required some minor changes. 2 side notes before I get on to the filtering side of things. Most of you might be aware of the sort of standard IX root server community filters that are in use. These are the ones that we use at INEX, where I'm just saying 65500 is the root server's AS number. The default job of a root server is to take prefixes advertised by one participant and share them with all the other participants. That's usually what most people want, but in some circumstances you may not want them to go to a small few participants, in which case you can tag your prefixes so that to tell the root server, look, send them to everybody but these few people. So they're fairly standard communities for that. The second thing is a set of communities that came out of a EuroIX workshop from about 2 years ago. And these are a bunch of communities that tag routes with a certain piece of information. For example, this route has been verified, and it was verified using an IORDB, or it was verified using RPKI. And the second set of prefixes they have is why a route may have been filtered. So it's those ones that I'm particularly interested in here. So you can see, for example, 1101:3 would mean that this was a bogon prefix. Maybe it was a 192.168 prefix, for example. So we're going to use those extensively, and we've gone with the ones that EuroIX have, and we've built that into Birdseye and XP Manager so that we can give a consistent presentation of why routes may be filtered. So this is the root server filtering mechanism now in use at INEX, and that's now in use in XP Manager version 5 code. So I'm looking forward to your comments on this. Hopefully this will be a best practice implementation. What we're doing is we step through this list, and if a route fails anything here, we tag it with one of those 1101 communities, and we move on to the next prefix. So we first of all filter out any small prefixes, which is anything that's more specific than a /24 in v4, for example. That's configurable in XP Manager, but the /24 and the /48 are sort of the same defaults. We filter any Martians or bogons. We ensure that there's at least one AS and no more than 64 ASs in the prefix ASPAT. We ensure that the peer AS is the same as the first AS in the prefix's ASPAT, so that's just a little bit of sanity checking. We prevent next hop hijacking, and that's where a participant might advertise a route, but the next hop is somebody else's router. Now, if a participant has 2 or more connections into the exchange, we do allow them to point at their other connections, but not anybody else's connection. What's new is we're now filtering known transit networks, which is something that we learned from Job in his ongoing roadshow for better routing table security. So the last 3 are the IORDB and the RPKI bit. So one thing that RPKI can't do is if a member decides to advertise, say, Google's prefix, where Google's AS is the origin, and if Google has a rower for that, that will pass through the filters ordinarily, because we don't do PAT validation. So what we still do the IORDB validation on this. So when a member joins, like I said, we get their AS number or the set of ASs that they will originate prefixes from, and we ensure that the origin AS on the prefix advertised is in that set. So we do that first before we look at RPKI. So only if that passes do we look at RPKI. If it's valid, we're finished. We accept the prefix and we move on. If it's invalid, we're going to filter it and move on. So we're not going to tag and pass on invalid prefixes, we're going to filter them straight out. And finally, if it's RPKI unknown, we're going to revert to the standard IORDB filtering. So RPKI and IORDB are going to exist in parallel for quite a few years until there's full saturation of ROAs. So this sequence of filtering checks takes the 2 of those into account. So this is what it will look like in terms of bird. We have a peer, for example, AS112. They're going to peer with our root server, and in root servers, we have a separate routing table per AS. So those filters that we saw, those 8 or 9 checks, all happen as we import the prefixes from the BGP peer into its routing table. We don't drop them though, we just tag them at this point with that 1101 tag for future filtering. In order to propagate routes to other participants of the root server, they need to get into the master routing table, and Bird uses a protocol called a pipe for that. And a pipe has its own import and export filters. So it's at this point on the import to the pipe that we drop anything that has been tagged 1101. So that means that we've allowed the bad prefixes into AS112's own routing table, and that allows the looking glass to show AS112 what prefixes we're filtering and why. But then we filter them before we look at propagating them to the rest of the members. On the reverse, all of the other members' valid prefixes come into the master routing table and they get piped into AS111's dedicated routing table. It's at this point that we do that standard IX community filtering. So if somebody had said, I want to advertise this prefix to all participants except AS112, so I've tagged it 0:112, that we'll drop that participant with their tags is exactly what the other participants should get. So we don't add any tags We strip them out before we pass them on. This is an example from INEX. If you go to www.inex.ie/IXP/LG, there's a link to that in the slide later on. You can see the live looking glasses. This is a member of INEX who's advertising a prefix 87.192.220.0/23. That's being filtered because it's RPKI invalid. There is a single ROA entry for that prefix, and it states that the origin AS is not the origin AS that we're seeing. So that gets filtered and dropped, but you can see that we let the participants see that it's been filtered and why. So just some implementation notes. Validator software. When I wrote this presentation, I was aware of two. The first was RIPE NCC's RPKI Validator 3. RIPE's one is quite nice in that it comes with a web UI. You can put prefixes in, you can see the ROA entries if they exist. It's quite easy to install. It's a Java application. It's a little bit bloaty, but it's quite easy to install. It comes as two separate daemons. It comes as a validator/local cache, and then separately the RPKI to router daemon is runs separate to it. You need both to make the whole thing work. The commands to get it up and running are just the ones that are listed there. What we will do as part of our XP Manager's documentation is we will give much more detailed instructions how to set up a production server running the RIPE NCC RPKI validator. The second one that we use is Rootinator 3000. This is NL Labs. I think Tim, who just presented, is one of the developers of this. This one is really nice. It's small, it's really, really fast, and it just works. What we weren't aware when we did this is Cloudflare also has one, so we'll have a look at theirs before we release the final documentation. In terms of BIRD and the RPKI to router protocol, this is the configuration. It really is quite simple. You define a table that's going to hold your ROAs. You give it the remote IP and port of the RPKI to router daemon. And then there's some timers. I guess we don't have best operational practices yet as to what good values are for these timers. The expire there at 2 days means that if the RPKI to router daemon disappears, BIRD will hold on to those ROA entries for 2 days. That's the upper limit of what that should be. I chose it just in case it goes down on a Sunday morning. It's not going to ruin anyone's weekend before they can get in on Monday. This is BIRD's command to do an RPKI check. So it's just ROA check. You give it the ROA table, which is what we specified in the previous slide. So the table that contains all the ROA objects that came from the local cache. We give it the net, which is a prefix under validation. And we give it the origin AS. We use last non-aggregated here because we have, of about 100 members, 2 are sending us prefixes with aggregated ASs at the end. That evaluates, if you put in bgp-path.last, that evaluates as 0, which isn't going to work. So we use last non-aggregated on that. The result you're going to get is one of 3. Either it's RPKI invalid, so a ROA exists that covers the prefix, but the origin AS is invalid, or the max prefix length is invalid. The ROA is valid, or it's unknown. I think at the moment there's about 65,000 ROAs with 750,000 V4 roots. Obviously a lot of those are deaggregated roots, but maybe that means back of the envelope calculation, 10 or 15% of prefixes are probably covered by ROAs. AS paths, actually Tim did quite a bit in this already, and I talked about it already as well, about the example with Google, so I'm not going to labor that point. One operational thing to be aware of is RPKI revalidation. What that means is that if BIRD accepts a prefix and starts propagating it to all the other members, and if subsequently a ROA is created that might invalidate that prefix, BIRD will continue to propagate it, because as it learns new ROAs, it doesn't revalidate the prefixes it has already let through. The guys in BIRD are aware of this. They have a fix. They say it's not simple, so it's not going to be a quick fix. But in the meantime, a workaround is just to reload the routes that you've learned in. So just a simple cron job in the short term. We'll get that working. In terms of XP Manager development, we have BIRD 2 support. We now have RPKI support. We've done all the Looking Glass updates. And that's enough to release version 5. So as I say, we're just in the final testing phase. There's a few more bits in version 5, including a front-end refresh up to Bootstrap 4 and things like that. So we're going to write the documentation, and we'll get that out the door sometime in March. Then over the course of 2019, we would like to have root server diversity. And a lot of work has happened in OpenBGP over the last year, so we hope to get that in. And we're also aware now that some IXs are using GoBGP, so we'll try and have a look at that as well. Getting in new daemons isn't as easy as just generating the config, because we want to have them with all of the support in XP Manager, like the looking glasses, like monitoring that we do and things like that as well. So in terms of our implementation at INEX, we have 2 root servers and a root collector per LAN. We run 3 LANs, 2 in Dublin and a much smaller one down in Cork. We decided to upgrade the root collector first, because the root collector is a non-production system that doesn't export any roots. So we reconfigured the root collector, which is all done through XP Manager as well. XP Manager will do root servers, root collectors, and AS112 services. So we did the root collector, added in RPKI. We then used that to identify all the members who peer with the root server. So of 100 members at INEX, 80 are on the root servers. We excluded 2 of those because one was Hurricane Electric and one was another big transit network. So they had a handful of RPKI invalids, but we weren't going to be able to affect those. So we found we only found that there was 4 smaller members of the 80 with issues, and they were all quite simple issues. One had a more specific advertised than the ROA allowed for, so that was a very quick fix and change. One had an origin AS that didn't match the ROA, so that was a downstream customer of theirs that they had to go and sort that out. One member, which is the one we actually saw earlier on, was still advertising transferred space, and the new owners had created ROAs, so that was being blocked, and that was actually correctly being blocked. And then one member created the ROA for the upstream pure AS rather than for their own origin AS. They were all easily fixed before we went live, although we decided to alert the members on this as on an FYI basis. So we weren't going to stop our own rollout for these 4 little problems. So then we did router 1 on February 7th, let that bed in for a week, no operational issues, and we moved on to router 2 on February 14th. There's been no issues since. And there's been no production or service issues with Bird. Bird 2 has been in use at other IXs on root servers for quite a while. It was just the first time that XP Manager had rolled it out. RIBE's validator has crashed twice, so we need to have a closer look at that and figure out what's going on. It also went down a 3rd time when its database hit 5 gigs, so I'm not quite sure what it's storing, so we need to have a look at that too. We've had no issues with RootNator 3000, that's just been running away, no problem. And these, RIBE's validator and RootNator 3000, they're each supporting 18 different Bird daemons. So we have, it's 2 per protocol, it's 3 per LAN, and 3 LANs, that adds up to 18. So, so they are getting a fairly decent test there. One thing that I was concerned about was if we restarted Bird, would BGP sessions come up quicker than the RPKI to router protocol would come up? And we did put a timer on the BGP sessions, but that's only an outbound timer, not an inbound timer. But as it turns out, when we restart Bird, before we even have a chance to do a show protocols, the RPKI sessions are up with 65,000 prefixes. It's lightning fast. There's a lot in this. Bird 1 to Bird 2, root collectors versus root servers, large community tagging and filtering, RPKI versus IORDB and how all that works. So the one thing to do is that we found was important was to take time to build internal knowledge with the operations team so that they could handle any questions that came up. In terms of XP Manager, the templates are broken into units and they're skinnable. So a good example of this, for example, is the transit ASNs that we block. If that list needs to be amended within the window of an XP Manager update, you can just skin that template and make very simple changes to it. As well as shipping, as well as XP Manager, in the code we ship some sample scripts that give you a really production-safe way to upgrade your Bird root servers. It does a multi-stage process where it checks each stage before it does the final update. When we announced this last year, the plans to do this, we said that we would allow a per member opt-out of RPKI. In the end, we decided not to do this. We were only going to do this on a temporary basis just in case there was issues with particular members when we implemented this. It turns out there wasn't any real issues, and this was probably a bad idea anyway, so we didn't implement it in the end. And then the last thing is if you're using IXP Manager's root server templates to build your root server configurations, you're going to get excellent integration for Looking Glasses and other tools. So this is a live view, sorry, not a live view, this is a screenshot of IXP Manager at INEX, looking at INEX Quark's root collector, which is why the exported prefixes are all 0. So that's essentially a BGP summary. If we take a look at one of these, let's take a look at Aircom, which is the Irish incumbent operator. They're advertising 77 prefixes. If we click on that, we get a list of all of the prefixes they're advertising, the ASPAT, the next hop, and so forth. And you can see there's a little exclamation warning sign against some of these. There's a legend on this page that's slightly above what we're looking at, but that means that that route is being filtered. And we can click on the details there, and with that integration of those large community tagging, it's going to tell us why that route's been filtered. So we can see that it's RPKI unknown, and that's blue for informational, and we can see it's IORDB prefix filtered. So it's been filtered because it's not in the IORDB prefix list. As I said, at INEX, we do strict IORDB prefix filtering, which is what that third blue one means. So it's quite possible that they have a slash 22 or something in the root object, but you can see we just have a slash 24, that they're advertising a slash 24, so we're going to filter that at INEX. That's it for me, folks. What I will say, just to wrap up, is besides the work we do at INEX, IXP Manager is also sponsored. So we have a full-time developer who works with us in Dublin, thanks to the generosity of the sponsors here. Particularly APNIC came on board just before Christmas, or just maybe around Halloween last year, with a particular goal to give us a kick in the ass to get the RPKI stuff done. So that was money well spent, I think. Thank you.
Hi, Eric Cables. You mentioned that Andres said that he recommended not using V4 and V6 in the same process. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, what he said was that it would be more stable in that if one daemon crashed, you're only going to take out one protocol. He said they both work absolutely fine together, but he said for root server operations, it's probably better to maintain the separation.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Tim Ruijsels, Anelna Labs. I have one question actually. Do you use any of the filtering capabilities of the validator that you're using? Like to filter out certain prefixes or add your own?
So do we use any of the filtering functionality in the validators?
Yes.
No. At least we've only done this last week, so we haven't had any need to yet. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, folks.
Next up, we have Ed Lewis from ICANN to talk about his experience of using the WHOIS.
All right, good, it's still morning, I guess. My name's Ed Lewis from ICANN, and this talk has very little to do with the previous two talks. In fact, it's hard to wonder why this is actually I'm talking about a DNS topic in the routing area. It's kind of funny. But this is not really so much a talk about DNS, but about trying to do something with the DNS. So the setting. For the past couple of years, ICANN's been trying to get a message out about reconfiguring some parts of some of the servers out in the internet. The difficulty we had is we didn't have a list of who to talk to. And whenever you have communications, folks say, who's your audience? We don't know. It's the internet. It's anyone out there. Not everyone, though, because for many people, DNSSEC is not a thing. It's got low adoption rates. But for those who are using it, it's kind of important to have this information, but it's still, we have to balance how we get out there. We tried initially conferences. That's the usual way to contact people who, in an anonymous way. People come to conferences, they're willing to listen to messages, but we did that so much, we were told to go away. Some conferences actually told us, we've heard this enough, it's no longer new, let's go, we have to move on to the next thing. We tried letters to IXPs, we tried contacting letters to other regulators and so on. Tried to get the message out there, but there was data out there that said that we hadn't reached enough people to tell them that we were about to change the KSK. So we had this idea of doing a survey, or we were told to do a survey. I don't exactly know which way it came. Okay, so as I've said before, this is not yet another DNS talk, but this was part of the process of doing a DNS operation. It's something that can happen to any operational action out there that you have to get a general message out there. So the survey wasn't really there to gather information from people. When you have a survey, you have questions you want to ask, you work on them to make sure you get the right information from someone, and you get the responses in, and you look at the responses and you make a decision. Well, we really weren't going to do that. We didn't have that luxury of time to change our course. But we were using the survey as a means to get folks to just be aware. If you hadn't known already, we were going to do something. So we went down this. Now, and to do the survey too, you have questions, you have answers, but you need a list of people to invite to take the survey. And that's where the who is comes into this. We had to find a way to invite people to take the survey. So what we had a list of autonomous system numbers. We got that from traffic that came in indicating that someone in the network somewhere was doing DNSSEC and converting to AS numbers through some of the tools we have out there. And we thought, well, just use the RAR databases to find who to contact. What's the operator's address out there? Now, I was given the task, and I really didn't want to do this because I had no thought this would actually work. I've been around the RAR. I worked for the RAR 20 years ago. I know what the WHOIS database situation is like. This is not about the RARs and the way they've been managing this, but I know what the reality is of trying to get contact information for operators. And also, all of the resistance towards doing mass contacts based on this information. We know about that. And that comes down to the threat of spam. We were basically, in some sense, going to do a spam run on the internet. Unsolicited email to tell you something that you didn't ask for. But we weren't trying to sell something, we were trying to make sure that your operations didn't suffer an outage. So we felt this is a bit more of a justified use of this data. Now, I know on the other hand, if you have the data, you have the WHOIS database, you have the registry database, data mining is actually the real thing we're worried about. People mining that data for different purposes. Spam is being the #1 out there. So things like rate limits have put in there. You can't ask too many questions that quickly. I understand why that is there. We also found that in the data that you did get, sometimes the information you want was obscured or hidden or missing. In some cases, the email we wanted was not available until we had to get some assistance to get that. In some cases, people, and I'll get into this, the remarks of how to use the email addresses they have. And we were looking at this. Now, over the years, on the other hand, we also are aware that the mail system has been built stronger and stronger against spam impacting operations. So I'll skip to the end a bit here and say that we actually survived. We got things done. Our project succeeded. No one claimed that they were really put out by what we did. So apparently we got the message out to enough people out there. We contacted nearly 16,000 autonomous system numbers. That doesn't mean 16,000 operators. I never bothered to find out how many unique operators were in there, but 16,000 AS numbers were contacted in some way. We were very much afraid of this, but we were never accused of violating email protocol. I mean, not the technical protocol, but the use of email for things. We had no one claiming that we were spamming them. And the project seems to have succeeded. So I shouldn't have anything to talk about, but it wasn't easy enough. I actually wrote a 12-page documentation of what I did to get through this for internal use. And that 12 pages is a lot of detail. So what do I have in here? I'm going to talk about using the WHOIS system. I didn't use RDAP, but I know people are going to say, you should have used RDAP. It would have made life easier. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. I don't have a how-to in this talk. I don't want to encourage others to easily go through and mine the database. But it just wanted to go through some of the things in here. And what I'm really after here is, what I really want to see is, do we have a good global way to contact operators when we have a true operational message? and what do we need to make sure that that's a communication channel is always available to us. And again, this is not about this is called the RIR Whois experience. It's not about the way the RIRs have done their Whois. It's a general operator contact information. I've known that having myself worked in almost every kind of registry out there, many of us treat the data as garbage in, garbage out, and you wonder if maybe that's the best thing. Maybe in this case we want to look at, let's make sure we have a little better data. I know there are Whois accuracy talks out there. This is not one of them. I'm not after the accuracy of the Whois, but it's one of the issues that comes up in here. But I just want to kind of point out where this actually made some of our operations a little bit hard to do because we didn't quite have easy access to everything we needed. And I will also give to that the KSK rollover may have been a very unique event that only this time would this message have to go out there, and therefore my job should be hard. And I understand that. You don't optimize for everything. If it's a hard thing to do, that's fine. Okay, who is today? RDAP is tomorrow. So yes, I know that RDAP is coming. I'm very much aware of it. I know that it's been worked on by the RERs. It's been developed out there. But at the time I was trying to do this work, it just didn't seem to be easy enough to use. And at the first blush, it was too hard, so I went on. But at the end of the talk, I'll talk a little bit more about why I found it hard to use. So the approach I had was take the AS numbers, figure out where to get the Whois record, and then query and parse that, because you know it's unique across the board, if you're familiar with the RER Whois information. And the third step is just find the addresses within the data I have and send out the mail. So the way I approached this was that I looked for how do I find my region, and I used either Aaron or LACNIC with two choices. I used Aaron because Aaron was the easiest one to show me where to go. It had the easiest way to parse out. LACNIC could have done this too, but LACNIC had a problem. Let's just say a problem. The first block there was they rate limited this until I got that whitelisted. And there were some more combinations in the LACNIC language, or response format, rather. Other regions, I didn't try them, or they didn't have the information as easily. But one thing that's in the background here is that whenever you try to look at inter-RER information through the Whois, the RER sometimes will put in contact email addresses which point back to another RER, which is a signal that it's not, this is an internal message. Now, I knew this. I was very much aware of this, but some people who did some of this work in the first round for me, they didn't know that. We sent a lot of mail to one of the NIRs by mistake. To me, that I knew that to always pull those out or use that as a signal that something was going on. It's inside knowledge like this that is good to have, but it's hard to rely on it. Special flags, this is probably not a big deal here because the RDAP's coming and might take care of this, but Aaron has unique flags. Afrinic and RIPE use a different set of flags from everybody else, but those set of flags are built into some Whois software. This has got weird because when I ran on a Linux system, that client knew those flags. When I ran it on a Mac OS client, it didn't know those flags, and the clients don't have a -- version to let me know which one knew what was going on. It made running the scripts kind of a pain. But again, software takes care of everything. The National Internet Registries are a great idea. They help us scale to the needs of the communities involved. Now, some of the NIRs offer Whois services. Some have autonomous system information in addition to what's at the RER, and some have it only at themselves and not at the RER. Inconsistent. This was very difficult for me to figure out. I looked things up here. I was trying to do the right thing when I wrote my code, my scripts to find this stuff, and it was really interesting. I mean, I knew I could name all the NIRs from heart, but I didn't know which ones had services, which ones didn't. And that turned out to be a very tricky thing to go through. Was the inside knowledge here came up to help me, but I realized it was something that we should probably make a little more clearer. So APNIC. APNIC had 3 challenges for me. One was the NIR. There are 7 of them. At one time I found a web page, and I swear to God, I saw it, I can't find it again. But it indicated that 4 of the 7 had a Whois server. Okay, and so I went through with that. Now there is another there is still a page I found which has information here, but it turns out that of all of the NARs under APNIC, one of them uniquely has the WHOIS information for their region. Only one. So in other words, you go to APNIC, you look at the stack of addresses that you look up in APNIC, you get back all this information, and for some small set of them, you have to go off to another NAR. You have to. But just one. If it was all 7, that was easier, because you'd expect that. But only one of the 7, and you had to know which one that was. The second thing I had was that the APNIC information, when I asked for a specific autonomous system number, it would wrap that inside text about the block, the range of AS numbers that were given to APNIC to manage at some point. That meant I just had to do some stateful parsing of the responses to pull out what I wanted. And then the third part, of course, was for the NAR managed space. I had to have a different set of parsing code to deal with the NIR's choices up and down. So that was a little interesting. I thought maybe the NIR would have gotten the code from APNIC, but it wasn't even that case. It was a totally different setup. LACNIC also has NARs, and like APNIC, not all of the NARs are actively managing their WHOIS autonomous system AS number records. Again, that's a mystery. If I knew both were there, I'd go to both and get the data, but only one had them. LACNIC and also its NAR both had, I think, uniquely were using rate limiting in this case. So I actually had to go to channels I knew and got whitelisted, and I got through fine. I got all the information I needed. I justified why I had to get it. That's fine. And it's just an interesting thing that it wasn't available straight out. The interesting thing here, though, is while in APNIC I had this fairly long list of AS numbers I had to contact for DNSSEC, a small bit of them went to this one NAR, which was a very active region for DNSSEC, I thought. In LACNIC, it was the other way around. The entire RAR had a fairly long list, but that one NAR had 1/6, 1 out of 6 of all AS numbers I had to go to was at that NAR. And that, when you're doing some of this coding, you wonder, why is it spending so much time doing it? There's a lot of activity there. They have a lot of AS numbers with DNSSEC in that region. Surprising. So great, it's good. I gave a talk in that region. They were really proud of that fact. So the next thing, parsing responses, and this is, if you look at some of the responses that come back here, you see embedded in fields called remarks and comment, and I use that in there. These are from different RARs. I didn't say which ones they were. I think it was probably Ripe and Aaron, and remarks, comments, they mean the same thing in English, but they're different words. And inside there, registrants have embedded instructions for contacting them. In some cases, I want my email to go here, there, and there. In some cases, was an obfuscated op@example.com. They actually tried to make it hard so you couldn't just scrape that out. Of course, like with a script, I can do that, but we won't go about it. They have also restrictions. This tells me that people who are registering information have a desire to put more information into the WHOIS than we have in fields in the WHOIS right now. That's one thing to keep in mind about looking at the data model that we have for our WHOIS out there. I know we're not going to overhaul the whole system. You know, I actually remember the omnibus things back at Aaron to redo WHOIS, but the WHOIS out there apparently is underpowered for what some people want to convey about contacting them in there. And I'll also come back to, this is good also when you're doing one-on-one lookups, but when you have to automate to the scale of trying to contact a whole region, reading comments and parsing comments that are in English, it's not a scalable way to go. So to up-level this a bit, whether RDAP has matured enough to help this is something I really haven't, I didn't dive much into. I did a little bit, I added a slide or two at the end of this. And the major concern all along was whether this was acceptable use. One person at one of the regions said, we can't give you the information, but we can tell you how to look it up. There was some unclarity, a little, I guess less than necessary clarity on whether or not an operational need to contact someone was justified use for making use of the information in the database. So experience with the acceptable use here. 16,000 were contacted. We had one invitee of the survey respond that we had a mistake in our message. We sent a text message saying, here's what's going on, and we made a mistake somewhere, and one person caught the mistake. of all of these, we got one email coming back from someone saying that this was a GDPR violation. And GDPR, for those of you who are not familiar with Europe, is recent regulation about privacy and use of personal information. Ironically, it came from a network operator who had only role accounts in their Whois records. There wasn't even a person's name there. And it was only one. One. And these are the only 2 negative comments we got across the board from all the emails we sent out there. We were shocked it was that low. I mean, it was below, it's like your server's offline, you don't notice it, you have thresholds. This was way down there. We did actually get one that, are you guys for real? And yeah, of course, we responded to them nicely. We did, and we did get, on the other hand, we did get some outright positive responses. Not tremendous, like we're saving the world or being nice to everybody, but enough to say that people read the messages. We also got enough people asking us questions like, we need some help here, what's going on? And so we got through to some folks that needed to be gotten through to. And of course, I would assume that many people just ignored our requests out there, and that's not fine, but we can't do anything about that, but let's be realistic. We didn't get everybody, but we actually got more positive than the small number, 2 negative responses we got back. So we were happy. General uses, so let's put that in perspective. There's nothing, this was not a disaster in any way, but it was just a little tougher to get through than I expected. So general issues I found here. A lot of specific knowledge about the Whois was needed by me, having a long history in this area and having worked at the databases and so on. Lack of a common querying, again, that will probably be overcome by technology, hopefully, coming up. Lack of common response format, again, hopefully technology will take care of that in the next round of protocols. But lack of specific fields for contacts is something I'm kind of concerned about. Using comments and remarks to indicate information makes things a little harder to automate or to scale up to the, we're trying to automate everything these days, but we have this contact information which assumes a human is reading it. I think there's some work to be done there. The use of dummy values. When anybody in RER and NR puts a contact that's their own organization to indicate there's no valid value there or some other special meaning to this record, that's not a really good place to go. Sometimes default values become used in real life by mistake and things go bad. And the last one's a little controversial, I guess. I'm not even convinced that I'm on the right beat here, but we have the blanket defense against data mining of just trying to prevent people getting the data out there. Maybe it's a good thing we have it there, but also we look at the rest of the world changing the way it's secure, things like mail. If that's the chief area, maybe it's time to say we can use the data or come up with another way to get to the data and let other things defend themselves the way they should. But that's open for debate. So specific information with APNIC, since I'm in APNIC's region, I would, if it were up to me, I would ask that when I ask for an autonomous system number specifically, that the block information not be sent back. It makes it a little easier to clear to see what's in there. It will cover some of the errors that may be popping up where there's missing information in the specific information. Clearer documentation would help about how to contact, or who to contact for some of the information. Like if it's only at an NAR, have a web page saying, go there and ask them instead. And frankly, these are suggestions thrown out of the talk. I've not formalized this. I have actually talked to people at APNIC staff that I know as friends and have alerted to some of the ideas here, and I have a few more specific ones. But if anyone feels I should have gone through a more formal process, or should, I'm all ears. I'm just not, it's been a long time since I've done the RER circuit, so I've forgotten how to do things properly. So, let me peek into the future and poke at RDAP a bit. And because it's fair to say I didn't use RDAP. I should have been more adventurous and done this. But so why didn't I do RDAP? Well, before I get into why I didn't do RDAP, that's actually the next slide. Here I looked at some of the JSON format. JSON, the JavaScript object notation. That's the response language, the formal language that comes back. And I found that in some cases, what was in the text Whois is just merely lifted into this formalized language. So like the remarks and comments are just that, which means that we didn't, it doesn't help. Just because it's in a format doesn't mean I can automate something on top of that. It's a little harder. So I would, and this whole same thing is coming up in other places too. We have a better technology, it can do better. maybe we don't want to just have it drop in protocol for protocol. We want to actually think about now, what can we do about that information? How should we render the information now that we have a better set of tools out there? So that's part of the revisit policies and how we just handle the registration data services now that we're in a new protocol. It might be worth someone's time to look at that. Not mine, of course. I'm asking anybody else to do it. So also, the RDAP, this is actually what kind of turned me off from RDAP, from doing this initially, was I couldn't find the RDAP servers when I quickly tried to find out something. So on this slide here, I have would-be lookups for AUTNUM 0. 0 is not a valid one as far as I know. No one actually has the 0 AS number. And so I tried, that's just a placeholder in here. But if you typed in the URL for the 5 RARs to look up where that number is, you get things like, Aaron has a registry AUTNUM 0. Wright puts .db in the domain name. Afrinic has RDAP instead of registry, and so on, you see down there. And in fact, when I typed in the example for APNIC, for some reason my browser suddenly went to Afrinic. I don't know why. It somehow got redirected right to F. Now, to be fair, when you did put in a real AUT number, it actually would bounce you to the right RAR. That part's good. But if you sat there and tried to type up, give me the information for that AS number off the cuff, like instead of who is whatever the client of the terminal, you went to the browser, you typed this in, it's not always in the same URL area. Yeah, you have to know the URL for that region, which is a little confusing. So commonality would be helpful, even if we're going to automate this anyway, but the commonality helps us build the tools and so on. So that's the end of my rant about using whois. So I invite questions, comments, people who want to yell at me for not being smarter about this. Yes, Martin.
Martin Levy from Cloudflare. I'll start with my usual ICANN meeting comment. Thank you for recognizing the last N in ICANN belongs to numbers, a very rare thing to have talked about. Okay. RDAP was meant to solve an awful lot of problems that whois has left in its wake. Can I just recommend that you go back a slide? We've come across this problem before, and there was in the namespace there's been movement to map RDAP servers, and I can't remember what the name of the subsystem is, but it's
Bootstrap?
Yes, Bootstrap. Sorry, thank you. As that's something that is very well known by ICANN and IANA, it would be just as easy for that to migrate to cover these 5 RIRs. Yeah. And I think you work for the organization that could help push that through. But I'm desperate to see the results of this page, because what your talk says is that whois is impossible to be used for consistent looking up this data. If you're running any abuse group like we do at Cloudflare, it is, everything in your talk is essentially the knowledge that sits in the heads of the people operating this, and there's no good way of automating it through. You didn't really put the final summary page together, which I was really hoping to see, but would you actually just talk about how you would recommend people go forward? I mean, is your recommendation that whois is a dead end and that maybe RDAP is the answer, or what? I'm trying to sort of get to the final punchline of how to move forward.
Sure. I think the first thing to recognize is that what we're after here is a way to view the database of registrations, right? Whether it's through whois or RDAP or any other protocol is kind of a secondary issue, right? RDAP and whois are just a channel into this database out there. The registration database